But there's something that happened, reported last night, this morning, that I think is very fascinating.
Space Pope Reptilian.
Oh, the Pope's involved.
The Pope is getting involved. This is VaticanNews.va. And the headline here, Pope to consecrate Russia and Ukraine to Immaculate Heart of Mary. Yes. Let me read a little bit.
What does that mean? Do you know what that means?
Not as well as I should, because I am not a Catholic. But this article kind of explains some of it here.
Okay,
Pope Francis
let's hear it.
will consecrate Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary on Friday, 25th March, during the celebration of penance that he will preside over at 5 p.m. in St. Peter's Basilica. And then it talks about just another thing happening here. And importantly, on the same day, the ceremony will be performed in Fatima, Portugal, by Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, papal almoner, who is being sent there by the Pope. The day of the feast of the Annunciation of the Lord was chosen for the consecration. Martyrdom of the Good. In the apparition of 13 July 1917 in Fatima, Our Lady, capital O, capital L, Our Lady, had asked for the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart, stating that if this request were not granted, Russia would spread, quote, its errors throughout the world, promoting wars and persecution of the church, end quote. And of course, 1917, the year, who was it? Stalin? I can't remember now. We just went over this. Lenin took over, and the communist sort of revolution started taking place in Russia. And then, quote, the good, she added, quote, will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be destroyed. That is the alleged message from the apparition of Our Lady Mary that allegedly happened in Fatima, Portugal.
I wonder, should we give just a little review? I mean, we've done entire Canary Cry radio episodes on the Fatima phenomenon, was it? With L.A. Marzulli, did a bunch of research on it, went down there, talked to people, tried to figure out what happened. But just as a quick review, I forget the date. What was it? It was like it was 1912 or something like that. So
some of the documentation. So it was May. I think it was May in 1917. These three young girls started receiving communication from an entity. And they sort of, they were like uneducated. They didn't know how to read or write or anything, but they were like receiving messages. A couple of them were able to speak to the entity. One was only able to see, but can't hear anything or something. So they started to get popular, in the local sort of thing. Like the rumor got out, like, oh, these girls are, they're talking to somebody, the spirit or whatever.
Right.
And as things progressed, it got to the point, I think it was October 1917, or maybe it was a little earlier, but it says here July. So maybe July. Okay, July 1917. There were like upwards of 70,000 people getting ready to witness what the little girl alleged was an appearance of Our Lady. Like she would appear to everybody. So all these people were there. And so what's remembered by the Vatican is, we received these prophecies from Mother Mary, and, the Vatican holds on to them. And part of some of the prophecies that were received involved the conversation about Russia. So very interesting stuff there. And that's what the Vatican told us. That's what's kind of been out there for about 100 years. L.A. Marzulli, a few years ago, did a deep dive on this. Again, went down to Portugal, interviewed the people that documented a lot of the writing. And he went directly to the source, the handwritten notes from 1917, right after this happened. And what's described is not an apparition of Mary, but rather what's more or less we can sort of surmise as a UFO appearance in front of a large crowd.
A mass sighting.
A mass sighting.
Of a bright light.
But it was also described as like a spinning disc at the time. They didn't really know what to say, so they called it a spinning sun, is what they described it as. And it came down, it kind of swooped around. It got near to people. The reports were that, it dried our wet clothes because it was a rainy day. But in fact, it was like burning people's skin too, which is kind of a consistent thing with UFO sightings. People that have, come close in contact with these things feel burns or feel other types of radiation damage or whatever.
Right.
So not the kind of serene spiritual thing that the Vatican has relayed to the rest of the world as a happen or a thing that happened, and I think they even named it a miracle, right? The church actually calls this a miracle, like one of the miracles of the church.
It took a while, but they did officially sort of call it a miracle.
Right. So I just think it's interesting that in this time when we see the Russia-Ukraine conversation or the conflict, the conversation that the Pope brings up is to invoke Fatima, the place where a UFO appeared in front of thousands of people, gave them a message, a prophecy, quote unquote, that allegedly had something to do with Russia, which we don't know for sure because what L.A. Marzulli uncovered, according to his research, Lucia was the one that relayed the Russia thing, that, this whole message here that the Vatican News cites.
That's the little girl's name.
The little girl's name. And she, according to LA, she didn't actually mention Russia until about 10 years later when she was, brought back in to sort of actually write down what was communicated to her from, like, the church brought her in and was like, okay, we need an official sort of statements or whatever. So kind of interesting.
Very interesting, especially in the context of sort of the broader Great Deception conversation, which, of course, is wrapped up in UFOs or interdimensional beings or aliens or whatever they want to be called, sort of supplanting or creating a secular explanation for miraculous and spiritual things, which was a big focal point of the Fatima miracle or miracle at Fatima. And when it comes to, biblical prophecy and time stuff, all this, Russia, obviously, another focal point. So to wrap it all up together in a nice little bow, as far as sort of like Great Deception foundational, foundation setting actions by the Pope, this is definitely somewhere near the top of the list.
Yeah. So this article goes on and goes through some of the various times that the Vatican consecrated Russia. And
they've done it before.
They've done it a few times, yeah.
No,
because it was part of the prophecy, man. You got to listen to Our Lady.
Right. Yeah.
Rejecting Our Lady, which, from our perspective, the other parts of what L.A. uncovered during his research of Portugal in that area is that there is a long history of goddess worship and serpent cults there in Portugal, right at that Fatima region there. And of course, you tie that back to like a female deity worship, ancient female deity worship and stuff like that. And that's straight up into the mystery goddess. Religions, the goddess. Yeah. So it all ties together. It's all coming together, Basil. But what's fascinating is to bring this sort of supernatural / UFO conversation into the Russia-Ukraine crisis, because with COVID, it was like, oh, what's next? The UFOs? And then it kind of was, it was like, oh, the government's like, yeah, we had a whole unit looking at UFOs.
They brought up the UFOs.
They brought it up. So
it's like every big world event comes out from a global authority, by the way, not just conspiracy theorists or whatever. It's the government comes out and talks about aliens in relation to COVID.
Or
and now the
UFOs.
Pope coming out and, making a connection between UFOs and potential World War III here.
Yeah, and I have another article. I'll just read the headline from aletia.org. And the headline is Our Lady of Fatima Statue to Visit Ukraine. The International Pilgrim Virgin Statue of Fatima will tour Ukraine on a mission of peace and reconciliation.
Yeah, that's a pretty talented statue.
So it's very interesting when we're talking about the beast system and is it Rome? And I mean, there is an element to that seems to be prevalent in our conversation today with all the stuff happening in Russia, Ukraine. So
yeah,
I found that interesting that within all the news cycle stuff, this is where we would land today, which is like, just all the stuff happening with the money and the Zelensky up there doing his thing, but also the Pope.
Yeah, and those are the kind of connections that takes 10 years of podcasting to be able to make. I mean, it's, again, another reason why I love sort of just our careers in general, Gonz, but this show that we get to do now is, there's plenty of news deconstruction on the war, and maybe even one or two of them will mention the Pope just getting involved. But how many other news deconstruction and analysis podcasts are going back 100 years to connect long-standing Catholic miracles, UFOs, biblical prophecy, space Pope reptilian, and Russian-Ukraine current events? Not a whole lot of them.